fish on. Hey, Radcast is on.
And welcome to the show, Mr. Jim Zumbo.
Gentlemen, I am pleased to be here, and I use that term loosely when I say gentlemen.
Al Linder. Just want to welcome you to the show. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to hang out with us on a podcast for a little bit.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it. There's nothing makes me happier than a cold in Minnesota. If I can't be out fishing, I should be talking about fishing.
Hailing from Wisconsin, Jana Waller.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's Radcast. Hunting, fishing, and everything in between. Powered by Bow Spider.
Brought to you by PK Lures and High Mountain Seasonings.
And now, here's your hosts, Patrick Edwards and David Merrill.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Radcast Outdoors. Again, we're taking a little time off for the holidays. Hopefully you all had a wonderful Christmas, and we've got New Year's coming up right around the corner. So we have a special podcast for you. I wanted to go back and highlight my fishing mentor. His name is Danny Kurttila, and he passed away just over a year ago. The guy is just one of the best fishermen that you've never heard of. That's why I always tell people is that he's the angler that has done all the things, but you never knew his name. And the reason for that is because he didn't care about that. What he cared about was pushing himself to be the best angler that he could be. So some of the things that a lot of people don't realize about Danny is that he had over 45 different world records between the Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame and the IGFA. They were all line class world records. A lot of them were for golden trout, mountain whitefish, and species like that. But what Danny was most known for was his accomplishments catching muskies. And in particular, he wanted to catch pike all over the world. And it was really cool when we had him record this episode because no one, to our knowledge, had done a pike slam, which is basically going everywhere that pike live and catching each of the different species and subspecies. So Danny had done that. And what makes this feat incredible is that a lot of the ones that he ended up catching to finish out, he had to go to a couple different continents for. Not to mention, he was battling bone cancer the entire time. Now, for those of you who don't know, multimyeloma is a bone cancer that attacks your flat bones, so your spine, your rib cage. Danny had absolutely horrendous pain. His spine, his ribs, all those things just hurt him every single day. And the guy would get out of bed, he would go fishing. And for those of you who've ever fished for muskies in particular, just go cast a big heavy bait for 2 to 3 hours and see how your body feels as a healthy person. Now imagine doing that as somebody who's battling bone cancer. I went with Danny on several of these trips, and I was just always impressed with his toughness, his drive, and just his commitment to what he was trying to get accomplished. And so we talked to him a little bit about his pike slam and a few other things, but what I want you to do is just really keep in mind the kind of person that Danny was and just his passion for fishing, his passion and love for the outdoors. And I hope that you'll enjoy listening to my fishing mentor, Danny Kurttila, on this episode of Radcast Outdoors. Hello and welcome to another episode of Radcast Outdoors. I'm Patrick Edwards.
I'm David Merrill, and I'm glad you're back for another week. We're here again.
And I've been looking forward to this one because I know this guest very, very well. He's taught me almost all that I know about fishing. Between him and my dad, they get all the credit, but
we've almost had to arm wrestle to get him to come on. But
Almost. But Danny Kurttila, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, so we're going to get into a little bit of stories about pike and muskies because that's what Danny really loves. But first, I want to talk about one of our sponsors. So I want to say a huge shout out to Bow Spider and David for sponsoring this podcast. He's got a lot of really cool stuff coming onto his website. So if you are a Bow Spider customer, he does have some how-to videos to use this product more effectively, which are really great. If you're a bow hunter of any kind, you got to have a Bow Spider bow packing system to pack around your compound because there's really no other way to do it as efficiently and with as many great ways of doing it as the Bow Spider provides. So
that javelina hunt that we filmed that'll be on the YouTube channel with those how-to videos, down there hunting in that pucker, thick, nasty brush. And dude, it was really nice to not have to hold my bow and push those pokey branches out of the way, but be able to retrieve it when I need it. So yeah, those guys can, bowspider.com is the website. Go check it out. That's enough about Bow Spider.
So let's jump into it. So just a little bit of history here. I've been fishing with Danny since I was a little kid. And Danny, like I said, he's taught me a lot of what I know. And he's a very knowledgeable fisherman and has fished literally all over the place, which we're going to get into. But Danny, kind of where I wanted to start, just so people can get to know you, is, you know, how did you get into fishing and where are you from?
I was born in southwestern Wyoming, and when I was growing up, my grandparents had a lake house on Crooked Lake in the Brainerd area of Minnesota, the north central Wyoming, or Minnesota. And as a little kid, we used to get brought up there by our folks to fish for bluegills off their dock. And I guess the first time I ever fished up there, I caught up my first bluegill, and I was so excited. I was probably like 4 years old or so that I started jumping up and down and jumped off the end of the dock into the water. So that was a pretty good sign that I was pretty bad hooked on fishing right then.
Mm-hmm. So, you know, growing up, who really got you into fishing?
Mainly my dad and my grandfather. They were both like to fish for northern pike was their thing, but they'd let us fish for bluegills and stuff on the dock all the time. And my grandparents like fed the bluegills with like cornmeal and Quaker oats and all sorts of stuff to keep them around. And then when we'd get up there, we'd fish for the worm. We didn't even have poles. We just had like a willow stick with a line tied on and a hook and a night crawler and maybe a piece of worm and a bobber, and that's how we'd catch. And we'd catch quite a few. Nothing really big enough to keep, but our folks let us keep some, you know, so we could contribute to the meal or whatever. But my dad and grandpa would always go out on the boat and fish for northern pike. And as we got a little older, they started taking us out there with them, me and my brother right below me. And they wouldn't let us fish for northerns. We had to sit and watch or else fish, you know, bobbers right off the side of the boat. They'd be casting these big spoons and raplas and catching these northern pike. And if you have ever caught a northern pike, you know they're pretty good fighters, and it's pretty exciting. And I remember one time we were fishing with them, and they caught 4 or 5, you know, up to 6-7 pounds maybe, which back then that was a huge fish when I was a little kid. And a couple of them got, so they get really violent when they get next to the boat and when you net them and stuff. And one of them, they had to cut the net apart to get the pike out of there. And so the next day, when I returned back to Minneapolis, because I was living in Minneapolis at that time, I wrote a story about their fishing trip and how impressed I was, you know, that they had to cut the fish out of the net and all this other stuff. So at an early age, I got to be a big pike fanatic. But they never would let us fish for them because we were too little, and they were afraid we'd get hurt. Because if you haven't caught a northern pike, their whole head's full of these huge teeth that are razor sharp, and their gill covers are razor sharp, and their gill rakers. So anything from the head forwards is a dangerous part to grab on one of them. And then about the time I was getting close to old enough to go, we moved to Arizona. Well, there's not a whole lot of pike fishing in Arizona.
So did that really spark your interest in pike? Was, you know? Oh
yeah, watching how exciting their fights were and stuff. Oh yeah, I was hooked on them big time. That was like my dream fish to someday catch was a northern pike. And we made a few trips out after we moved. First we moved to Arizona, and then we moved up to Riverton. And we went back a couple times, and one time we went out with my great uncle. He had a lake place on another lake called Buchanan Lake, and we were fishing smelt, big old long smelt. And my brother kept catching these little bullheads that were barely bigger than the smelt. And then he finally caught a pretty good northern. And then I finally got one on. It got underneath the boat and broke my line, and I was just heartbroken. And then my great uncle, he caught an 18-pound northern when we were with him. And man, that was the biggest fish I'd ever seen in my life. And that got me even more excited. Well, when we got done, back then, nobody believed in releasing anything. And so he was cleaning fish in the garage, and I walked over to the garage to see what was going on. Just as I did, he was tossing that northern pike fish guts out, and it hit me right in the face with all them guts. So
that's always a lovely experience.
That was a real cool experience. But after that, I really had to catch a pike. But when I was like junior high and stuff, I mostly just fished trout and walleyes and bass around here, because the closest pike fishing in Wyoming is up at Keyhole, and that was way too far to go when I was that age. But when I got older and was living by myself and working for Pepsi, I started making trips to Minnesota every fall I finally got about an 18-inch northern, which is just a peewee one, but I was so proud of that stupid fish. It was embarrassing. And then my dad had caught, the biggest one he'd ever caught when he lived in Minnesota was 18 pounds, and so that was my target. I had to catch one bigger than my dad's, and I kept going and never was getting anything real huge, and thought about going, to Canada and fish for him, but I never did get around to it. And then I started reading about muskies. Muskie's a member of the pike family too, but it gets a lot bigger than northern. I thought, man, that's what I got to be fishing for, and made the mistake. The first time I ever went fishing for him was in a lake in downtown Minneapolis called Lake Harriet. I'd read that it had muskies in it, and so I went out there with my great big spinning rod. I bought this real long, supposedly European predator rod or something, and was throwing this bucktail, which is just a big spinner with a big wad of hair tied on the back of it. That's supposed to be like one of the top muskie lures. And I didn't have a boat or anything, but I was fishing off the dock with my cousin, and I had this, started reeling in. There was this fish behind my lure, and I thought it was just a carp, so I stopped reeling and was looking at it, and then I finally figured out it was a muskie. Well, that's the worst thing you can do if a muskie falls, is to stop reeling, because they'll lose interest and swim away. You're supposed to do like figure eight or whatever when you get a muskie in. After that, it was only like probably a 3-footer, but that looked like a huge fish back then, and that pretty much got me started on them dang muskies. And so then I started going on all my vacations to Canada and Minnesota muskie fishing, and it was like a couple years before I caught my first muskie. And then it was only like 32 inches, but it might as well have been a 100-pounder, as happy as I was. The guy that I was fishing with, he said I wouldn't quit saying, I can't believe I got one to finally open his mouth and eat. And I just kept saying that, I guess, over and over again. And I was really proud of that fish, but I've caught a lot bigger ones since then. But
yeah, I was going to say, how many do you have now? Because, that's been a long time ago, because you've caught a lot since then.
Probably close to 800 if you count tigers and purebred muskies. So
yeah, so you keep having that itch to go after them, obviously.
Oh, yeah, that's my favorite fish. I spend most of my summer driving to Utah or Nebraska or somewhere to go muskie fishing or tiger muskie fishing, or
right.
Even can do a little bit of that now in Fremont County with Badwater Pond and Bass Lake and Middle Depression Reservoir all have tiger muskies in them. So, and I actually caught a tiger out of Bass Lake a couple of years ago, so I have hopes that that's going to turn into a pretty good tiger muskie fishery eventually.
Well, I've told Patrick several times that, I only need to get one more elk harvested, and then I can feel complete as an elk hunter. And it just turns out that I shoot one, and I need to shoot just one more. Right? I kind of pick it that's how muskie fishing is. I just got to catch one more, right?
Yeah, and then you got to hit the magical numbers like 30 pounds or 50 inches or whatever, or 55 inches if you get really good at it. I guess I haven't got really good at it because I haven't caught a 55.
Yeah, but you've cracked 50 on both muskies and tiger muskies.
Yeah,
so I'd say you're doing all right.
I've caught 7 altogether, 5 purebreds and 2 tigers that were 50 or bigger.
Yeah, and just for the listeners who aren't familiar with muskie fishing, it's a feat in itself to catch a muskie, but to catch 800 or around that ballpark of muskies or tiger muskies, that's something special. And you have to spend a lot of time. It's not something you just wake up one morning and you go do it.
You get skunked a lot fishing for muskies and tigers, but once in a while you'll have good days.
It's your fault, by the way, that I'm hooked on tiger muskie fishing. Same thing. I've told this story on the podcast before, but I had a tiger muskie follow me in, and that got my heart rate up big time. And then had one strike, and I pulled the lure out of his mouth, which was really depressing. But yeah, now that I've caught them, they're one of the more addicting fish to catch for sure. So what really, you talked a little bit about what got you hooked on pike and muskie, but what was it that kind of got you the drive to go after, all the different species of what we would call a pike slam or an unofficial pike slam?
Well, after I moved to Tennessee, they have chain pickerel and grass pickerel down there, and I started fishing for them, trying to catch them, and I caught my chain pickerel fairly fast, but I wasn't catching any grass pickerel. And so I pretty much spent like early summers fishing for chain pickerel over at Kentucky Lake, and then later on I'd go up to Kentucky and Tennessee and muskie fish. But when the water levels were, or when it was fairly cold out, I mostly specialized in pickerel fishing. And one day I was fishing one of my favorite chain pickerel spots, and I had this hit on a spinner, and this fish jumped out of the water, and it didn't look like it was the right color. And so I kind of got a weird, felt like that was kind of strange. And when I got it in, I could see it wasn't a chain pickerel, it was actually a grass pickerel, and it was a big one. It was like 14 inches. Well, the world record grass pickerel is only a pound even, and it's probably like 17, 18 inches long. So that was a really big grass pickerel. And Tennessee didn't have a state record grass pickerel at that time, and so I was way out in the lake wading, and I was going to try and bring it in and put it in a cooler and take it and get it certified as a state record and then turn it loose. Well, when I got about halfway in, it flipped out of my hands and went back in the water, so I never got my state record grass pickerel.
Oh, man.
And unfortunately, that's the only one I ever caught. But I did catch a grass pickerel, chain pickerel hybrid one time, which is kind of an unusual deal, but all the pike family can interbreed with each other, the fertile ones anyway.
So what are all the different species in that pike family?
There's 7 species and 1 subspecies. The smallest ones are grass pickerel, which is a subspecies of the redfin pickerel. And a grass pickerel only gets up to a pound, and the record's from like Indiana. And grass pickerel aren't available in too many places, but there's a lake in Nebraska, or several lakes in Nebraska that have grass pickerel. And they've caught some pretty good sized ones, but it's way on like the eastern side of Nebraska. And then redfin pickerel are pretty much confined to the Atlantic coast states, like New York and New Jersey, and like the southern states like Florida and Georgia and North and South Carolina and Virginia and places like that. Well, after I caught that grass pickerel, I realized that the only subspecies I hadn't caught that was available in the U.S. was a redfin pickerel, and so I made a specific trip to Florida because I contacted some fisheries people in Florida, and they recommended a place where I might have a chance of catching a grass pickerel. Well, I went out there about spring break time, and I didn't realize it, but that's about prime mosquito time in Florida when you're walking around in the swamp. Plus, you got to watch out for alligators and all sorts of good stuff. But I finally caught a little tiny redfin out of this one creek called Deep Creek, and it was a monster. It was like 6 or 7 inches long, and I caught it on a 32nd ounce jig with a little plastic minnow on it. And so I finally had all my North American species. And at one time, it was believed there was 3 subspecies of muskies, so I made sure I had all of them, the Ohio River, the Great Lakes, and the Northern. And the Northern are the barred fish, and the Great Lakes strain are the spotted fish. And then the Ohio River are the more silver ones, the clear ones. But there's variations, and I mean, you get spotted and barred ones sometimes out of the Ohio River strain. And so I made sure I caught all of them, and then I added a tiger muskie because they're a hybrid that's widely available across the U.S., and they stock them extensively out west, like in Utah and Wyoming and New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, Idaho, and Montana, and then Washington State has a bunch too, but I haven't made it up to Washington yet to fish for them. And so I had all them, and when I was in school, I got a degree in fishery biology back in the mid-'90s at the University of Wyoming, and I'd read about this pike that's only available in Asia, Far East Asia. It's only available in Russia, Mongolia, and China. And so that was like my dream fish to catch, besides my muskies and stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I like to rib Patrick a little bit that, I do a lot more hunting, and he's the fishing guru, right? But when I went to Africa, I took a day and went fishing on the Zambezi River.
Oh, for tiger fish?
And I lost the one fish we hooked that day, and it's still, it stings. I know you were talking earlier about that one, the pickerel you'd lost that might be a state record. I'm sure my tiger fish he jumped out of the water twice, and we were using steel leader, right? But he got off, and I don't really need to go back to Africa to hunt. I've checked that box. But that dang fish, I got to go catch that tiger fish out of the Zambezi. The thing that scared me, though, when we had a guide, and we were on a pontoon boat, and we went by a Nile crocodile. that was as long as that pontoon boat. And I'm not kidding, guys. It was up on the bank, just sunning itself. Yeah. And the guide kind of tapped everybody on the shoulder and looked. Because, I mean, they're still a little spooky. And I looked over and my jaw just, I mean, we're talking 15, 16 foot.
Yeah, you don't want to wade out there, I don't think. But anyway, I understand that. And then tigerfish are supposed to be like awesome fighters and stuff. I've always wanted to catch one, but I don't know if I'll ever make it to Africa to get one. So anyway, I'd read about this pike in eastern Russia and Mongolia and stuff, and that was like my dream trip to go. But working and stuff, I didn't have time to take off, for a couple of weeks to go over there, and couldn't really afford it. And so I kind of put it on the back burner, didn't really think much about it. Well, then I was diagnosed with cancer about 5.5 years ago, and I thought, man, if I'm going to get any of this stuff done, I better do it before, because I didn't know how long I was going to have, because they made it sound like I only had like a few months to live when I first got diagnosed. And so once I got where my cancer was somewhat under control, I decided to take the plunge and go to Russia. Well, I wanted to go to Mongolia, but I couldn't afford Mongolia, but I found a guy in Russia that was willing to take me out for a fairly reasonable price. And so I made the trip out there, and boy, it's an eye-opener when you go to another country from the U.S., especially Russia.
Yeah. Well, before we get into that too much, I got to talk about one of our other sponsors before we get into the Russia experience. But so PK Lures, Danny actually can attest to this one because he's used the flutterfish before to catch tiger muskies. But PK Lures are amazing lures. You can use them for a lot of different applications. There's spoons that you can use. So they have the PK flutterfish and PK spoon, which are good for either casting or vertically jigging. Danny, I think you used them to catch tiger muskies, casting them and kind of ripping them along. And then they have a whole line of crankbaits for open water trolling, for walleyes, for trout, for basically anything that's going to bite. And then they have some really awesome crawler harnesses, the PK Wobbler, PK Dakota Disc, and a few of the others. You definitely got to get out there and try those. So go to pklure.com. You can find those incredible lures there. We are having a big giveaway in the month of April that you can sign up for a huge prize pack that includes some PK Lures, so definitely check that out on our website. But again, thank you to PK Lures for sponsoring. So Danny, to get back to this, so you get to Russia, and for those of you who are out there, you don't realize how sick Danny was. He doesn't really talk about it, but I mean,
he's kind of downplaying it a little bit.
Yeah, this guy fishes seriously more than anybody I've ever met, like a ton of days a year, probably at least a third of the year. He's finding a way to make it somewhere to go fishing, but this cancer really took him out. And I mean, he was on the edge there for quite a while. And so we were all just kind of wondering what was going to happen. And he got,
and here he signs
better.
Up and goes to Russia.
Well, he got a lot better, and it was really cool to see that. And then he says, "Hey, I'm going to go to Russia." So tell us, what's it like going to another country, especially Russia, that's so much different than here?
Well, for one thing, there's a military presence everywhere you go. I mean, you can be out in the boonies and there'll be soldiers like alongside the road, like all the bus stops and stuff, because they have a lot of bus stops out in the rural area. Unlike Wyoming, they have pretty good bus service apparently out there. And people in Russia are really, really pushy. Like when I went to get off the plane, I was sort of towards the back of the plane, and I was starting to get up, and people were just pushing me out of the way to get to the front of the plane. So I finally just waited until they all got in front of me. And then you get up there, and then you have to go through customs, and their customs agents, I don't think, know how to smile. I mean, I think it'd break their face if they smiled. I had my passport, and to go to Russia, you have to get a letter of invitation from somebody over there. And so I had my letter of invitation and my passport, and I hand it to him, and this woman just glares at me and looks down, and I stand there, and then she glares at me some more and then looks down again, and finally she let me in, and it was like, whew, I didn't think I was going to get through, and I didn't have any reason to worry. I wasn't like trying to sneak anything in or out, and got picked up by this guide friend that he wasn't a friend at the time, but became friends with, and they drive on the same side of the road as we do, but all their vehicles are the wheels on the right-hand side like English cars. And I didn't know that, and we went to get in his truck, so I walked over to the other side, and he goes, "What, are you driving?" I said, "No." And I looked, and the steering wheel was on that side, so that was different. And then they drive like maniacs out there, and their roads are terrible. Because we had to drive, around 100 miles to get down to the part of the Amur River basin that we were fishing. And so that was, are we going to make it alive kind of thing. And then when they were doing a bunch of construction, and instead of doing anything to fill it, they just leave it however it is when they get done. So, you have to really pick your way carefully. And like I said, the people there just drive like maniacs, and the streets are real narrow and stuff. It's amazing they don't have wrecks all the time over there. And then there's like all these bus stops out in the middle of nowhere, and you look and there'll be like a soldier or two almost at every bus stop that you see. So the military still keeps a pretty good clamp on the people over there. And as far as like shopping and stuff, their stores seem to have, decent amount of stuff, because I guess when the communists ran it, you had to wait in line to get a loaf of bread and stuff, and it doesn't seem to be that way anymore. And most of their architecture in their cities are these old like military barrack style apartments where they're just cement walls and stuff, really crude. The only real fancy places are either government buildings or big churches, and everything else is pretty mundane and bleak looking. And then everybody over there is driving either like Japanese or Chinese or Korean vehicles, or else they have these old ancient Soviet military trucks and stuff. And so it's weird. You don't hardly ever see any, like mid-size or bigger cars or full-size trucks. It's all these like little Japanese and Korean trucks and stuff like that. It was weird.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the excursion and going on the trip, because I remember when you came back, there was a lot of interesting stories. One about the flies that tried to carry you off.
They have
different fishing styles and all kinds of stuff. So tell us about that.
Well, when I went out there, it was in the summer, which was a mistake. I should have gone like in the fall or the spring, and I didn't realize that they had such a problem they got like giant horse flies and then real tiny like black flies, but they're kind of yellowish colored. They just eat the heck out of you. And they hit you like in the middle of the day. And then in the early morning and the evening, it's mosquitoes, just eat you alive. So it got where I was having to like tape my gloves up around my arms or the sleeves of my shirt and stuff, and tape your ankles to keep from getting just ate alive by them, especially them flies. And it was pretty rough out there, and you don't see hardly any game. I think they're so poor out there that they pretty much kill everything they can, And then the area we were in actually has Amur tigers, but they're like super rare. There's only like 400 of them in existence anymore. But there was a chance, you might run into a tiger, which that would have been weird. Scarier than heck, too. Yeah. We actually camped on an island. Well, we camped on two different islands. We camped on an island up in this tributary of the Amur called the Gura River.
What was your camp like?
Oh, we just had a big tent and two floating rafts with gas engine. And it was pretty portable. We just set up when we got there. It wasn't like something he had set up. And he said the reason we were camping on an island was because like a lot of the woods around there had some kind of tick that give you a real bad disease, and they didn't want me to get bit by one of them, and I didn't want to get bit by one of them. And so we pretty much either fished or, stayed on the islands or else fished out of the boat. We didn't really walk around the shores or anything. I did around the shore of the island because they said the high water, blows all the ticks and stuff off of the islands and stuff, so you're pretty safe on there. And then after I caught my Amur pike, and everybody was laughing at me because they all fished like spoons and spinners for the pike, and I brought a lot of topwaters, small topwaters like I use for muskies and pike out here. And they couldn't believe how much better luck I was having with them topwaters than they were having with their spoons. And the one guy was pretty much a fly fisherman, but he was trying to see if he could make a fly that'd have a similar action to my topwater. And then the other guy was really interested in those lures because it was something I guess they don't have over there. And so when I got back, I sent him some of them whopper plopper topwaters because I'd done pretty good. I only caught like 5 Amur pike and lost a couple others. And then we went over to the main, and I caught a Amur catfish, or 2 Amur catfish, which are relatives of those huge whales catfish that they catch in Europe. They don't get near as big, but they look exactly like a whale's, just a small one.
So like a huge head and kind of skinny tail.
Yeah, almost like a snake or something with a great big huge head. And they seem to like topwaters pretty good. And then I caught this fish called a flathead asp, which is a predatory species of minnow that aren't real common to catch, and they seem to like topwaters pretty good too. So I caught some weird fish, and then we went over to the main Amur to catch some. Mostly what they catch are either Amur pike, or when the season's right, they get a lot of those. They get taimen and lennox, which are salmon, related to, trout and salmon. But the time of year I was there, you would have had to go way, way further upstream than they wanted to go to run into them, because the water warms up too much in the summertime. Because we were there like in July, it was like 90 degrees almost every day. We were there, or more, with real high humidity. It wasn't really fun.
So what did you eat? Did you eat those fish that you caught?
You gotta tell us about the catfish, Steve.
He brought some reindeer meat, and we had like reindeer stew and stuff. And then he bought cheese and a few things. And then one of the Amurs I caught, the smallest one I caught, was hooked in the gill, and so it wasn't going to live, and so he filleted that out, and I got to try that. Well, then when we went on to the main Amur River, we camped on this island that was about a half mile across the lake or whatever, or across the river. And I caught one of them Amur catfish, and he told me to keep it. And so he went over to the river and scooped out some of that Amur River water, which is nasty looking. That other river was real clear. It was like a trout stream, but the Amur River looked really bad. And then he started cutting that catfish up in chunks and threw it into that deal and made a stew out of that catfish. Well, I wasn't too keen on the fact that he was using that Amur River water, even though he was boiling it. I mean, it had all this algae and stuff in it. It was just nasty looking. And we had these big containers of spring water that we'd gotten filled, and I wish he'd have used that instead. And then he brought the catfish over, and he gave me the first bowl, and it was the one with the head.
That was probably a sign of respect, right?
I guess. I don't know.
Or he was testing you.
Anyway, I tried it, and it wasn't terrible, but I really wasn't that enthused with it. And so he got to talking with this other guy that came over. One of his friends came over in a boat to visit us on the island. They were all BSing and stuff, and I accidentally fling my catfish into the river and they weren't watching.
Wasn't the most appetizing meal you probably ever had.
It wasn't terrible, but I just don't like catfish that well. And then the fact that it was in that nasty looking river water just made it really hard to get too excited about.
No McDonald's to go by and grab a cheeseburger, huh?
No. We did he had a friend in there's all sorts of little villages along the river, and he had a friend in one of the villages that ran out some water to us, and then he also ran a couple of Cokes to us, because I needed a caffeine fix pretty bad, and so I talked him into bringing out some Coke, and then also he brought out like some fresh strawberry preserves that were really good and stuff like that. So he kind of saved us a little bit, I think. I probably lost some weight while I was out there though, because.
So how many days were you gone total?
I was in Russia for I think 6 days, and then it's like a whole day to fly back.
Didn't you catch another fish too? There was another species.
Well, I caught two in the main river, a sky gazer, which looks like a tarpon.
Oh yeah,
and then I caught a Mongolian redfin. They're just two different minnow species that they're okay. But there's this one species of minnow that we were trying to catch called and I can't think of the name of it right now, but it looks a lot like a barracuda, but it's actually a minnow. It doesn't have any teeth at all, but it gets up to like 60, 70 pounds.
And that's a minnow over there, minnow species. That's crazy.
There's a lot of pretty good-sized minnow species over there because they got all sorts of different kinds of carp and stuff too.
Which one fought the best out of all of them?
Probably my Amur pike, because they were about the biggest fish that I caught. The catfish probably would have been stronger if I'd have caught some bigger ones, but I didn't catch any bigger ones.
So for the listeners out there, what does a pike slam include?
Well, there isn't really an official one. I'm trying to get the IGFA to start one. But what I consider a pike slam are all 7 of the species, plus the one subspecies of pickerel. And then I caught the 2 different, I guess they're 3 different strains of muskies now that they aren't considered subspecies, plus a tiger muskie because they're pretty available.
Right.
And then the Amur pike, and then like a couple of years after I went there, they decided there's 2 new species of pike in the world. Aquitaine pike, that's only been listed as a species for like 5 or 6 years, and southern pike, which has been a species for about 10 years. Well, I wasn't aware of that at the time, and then I don't know, I got back from Russia and I was having some real bad problems with my neck, and got a hold of a neurologist from Casper, and he did some tests, and he said, "Oh, your vertebrae are collapsing." He said, "You might be in a wheelchair by the end of the year." And I thought, well, that's not good. And so I'd heard about those other 2 species, and I thought, man, if I'm going to try and catch them, I better go and get them while I can still move. So I made the trip over to Europe, and to get the southern pike, you have to fish in Italy, and to get the Aquitaine pike, you have to fish in France. And so I did both of them on one trip. I got a hold of an Italian guy that was on this muskie site that I go on. I was asking for information about southern pike and Aquitaine pike, and he said, well, if I came out, he'd take me fishing for the southern pike, and then we could also fish for the northern pike that they have in Europe are a lot, like, way girthier and heavier than the ones we have in the U.S. They almost look like a different fish. They're so much fatter. They're built more like a muskie than a northern pike. And so we went to this little lake, because the Italian pike, or the southern pike as they call them, I don't think they get quite as big as a northern pike, and then their colors they're almost like a tiger muskie, but with horizontal stripes and spots instead of vertical ones like a tiger muskie. And they're real cool looking fish. And we fished this little lake called Lake Ogano, which is west of Milan. I flew into Milan, and we drove over. There's like these Italian Great Lakes. There's like Maggiore, and I can't think of all the names, but there's a bunch of these real huge lakes. And then there's the smaller lakes, and the smaller lakes are generally what have the southern pike in. And so he likes to troll, and so we trolled for like hours and hours on that lake and didn't have any action. And then the weather was starting to get nasty, and he said, well, we'll try casting for a while. And then we went over, and there were some places where there's like reeds in the water.
Did you take your whopper ploppers again?
Mm-hmm. But I didn't catch anything on them. But I was using a red fin lure that I catch a lot of tiger muskies and muskies on, that Pat's been with me when I've had success on them. And
yep.
Started throwing that, and about a half hour after I started throwing it, I caught a small southern pike. It was like 24 inches long, but I was more than pleased that I caught one at least. And then we kept casting. I had a couple others follow me in, but I didn't get them hit. And then the weather got bad enough that we had to get off the lake because it was just starting to pour. And so I caught my southern pike, but I only caught one. And then the next 2 days, he wanted to go fish Lake Maggiore because there's huge northern pike in there. Like his biggest one's, I think, 51 inches that he caught out of there, which for a northern pike is huge. He said that he hoped that I could catch at least a pike over a meter long, and then that southern pike, and he'd consider it a real successful trip. And the first day I caught 2 northerns. One was 35 inches and the other was like 36, which they were decent fish. And the one of them I caught had a blue mouth, and his fins were kind of blue, and they call them emerald pike for some reason. It's some kind of a mutation or something. And I guess they aren't super common, but I'd never heard of them before, so I don't really consider them a subspecies or anything. So, and then the last day that I fished with him, we only had one hit the whole day, and I caught it, and it was a 41-inch northern, but I bet it weighed close to 30 pounds. It was so fat. It was amazing. So I was pretty happy with that. And then I was going to go to France the next day because I had like another day or day and a half I could fish in France, and then I had to head back to the U.S. And so I went over to France and got in there in the evening pretty late. And so the next day I walked into town to buy a fishing license, and that's almost impossible to do in France, I guess. It was a Monday, and for some reason the one place in town that sold them wasn't open on Mondays. And so I was all depressed, like, crud, I get all the way over here, and then I can't even go fishing. And then I saw this park, like provincial park or something sign. And so I walked up to their office, and I got to talk to a biologist up there. And he said, well, we can help you get one online. And so they helped me get a license online. And then he drove me over to the river to the area. He said that I should try and fish for those because they catch them out of the rivers. The Aquitaine pike, they're pretty small, like a 3-footer is a pretty big aquatine pike. And so I tried fishing by myself, walking along that river for several hours without any action. And there was a guy fishing there that was using minnows, and he'd caught quite a few, but I didn't have any minnows or any way to get any. And so I was getting kind of depressed. And that guy said when I got done fishing to give him a call, and he'd give me a ride back to my motel or whatever. And so I called him and I said, man, I haven't had any action. I said, and I'm getting pretty tired. And he goes, well, I got 2 friends that are going fishing this afternoon. Would you be interested in going with them? Because they said they take you if you want. And I said, yeah, I'll go. Because, I mean, they know the river and stuff. And so he drove me into town. I bought something to eat. And then I met his friends, and we went out to some other secret place on the Lair River. We tried this pond that supposedly had fish in it, but it was so shallow. I don't know how we could have caught anything. I guess the water was low or something. And then we went to this other spot on the river, which I couldn't even tell you how to get to now. It was almost like blindfold you in there type deal. But we got over there and we were fishing, and I hadn't been having any action. And finally I got over to this one place, and there was these cement posts in the water. It must have been like an old dock or something in that area. And I cast over there with one of my favorite spinners that I use for chain pickerel. And darn if I didn't have a strike. And I thought, well, I'm probably going to lose him. And I started getting him in, and his son was fishing a little bit further upstream than me, and he hooked a pike at the same time as I did. And so that guy was having a hard time deciding who he should go help. And so he ran over real quick and helped me get my fish in. And then he ran over and got his son's fish. Well, his son's fish was like 36, 37 incher. It was a really big aquatine pike. Mine was only like 22 inches long, but I was still really happy because I thought, man, I got all of them now. And so we got some pictures, and of course, he took pictures with me and his son, and his son's holding this big one, and I got this little tiny one. Not too impressive looking, but at least I can say I caught one. And then we fished for a couple more hours, and we never had any more action, so I couldn't believe it. I only caught 1 southern pike and 1 aquatine pike, but I did catch 1 each, so awesome. Ended up with all the species. And now there's some like hybrids that I haven't caught, like over in Lake Champlain and on the Vermont-New York border. There's a bunch of chain pickerel northern pike hybrids in there that I want to go try and catch sometime. And then over in Nebraska at Watts Lake, they have northern pike grass pickerel hybrids in there. I'd like to catch one of them too, but I don't really consider them necessarily required for the slam because they're pretty rare.
So you have, quote unquote, the unofficial slam now.
Yeah, I've caught all the species and the official subspecies, and then all 3 of the muskies if they ever decide to turn them back into species again, because it depends on who's in charge of the scientific people that, decide species and stuff. There's what they call lumpers, and there's what they call splitters. Well, for a long time, the lumpers were in charge, and they were the ones that put like rainbows and cutthroats in the same family as a Pacific salmon. Because I used to consider rainbows and cutthroats in the salmo family, which is what brown trout and Atlantic salmon are. And then they decided that the cutthroats and rainbows and goldens were all close enough to Pacific salmon that they lumped them in with the Pacific salmon. Well, the trout don't spawn and die like the salmon do. So I never could understand why they did that. And so when they were in there, they were cutting down on the amount of species and families and stuff. But now the splitters are in there because all of a sudden these 2 new pike species show up. And I'm sure that they'll probably reclassify some of the salmonids, like cutthroats and rainbows and golden might start getting their own, genus or something. I don't know. It changes depending on who's in charge. So right now, like I said, it's the splitters. That's why I'm afraid they're probably going to decide there's another kind of pike here one of these days, and then I won't have them all.
I won't have them, and you'll have to go.
And
on
it'll probably be
trip.
like in Bulgaria or someplace, like that, where you have to go a long ways to get one. It won't be like in Canada or something.
Yeah. But to put this in perspective for people, I mean, you had to go multiple places across the US.
You have to go to at least 4 countries.
Yep. 3 continents.
3 continents. And
lots of miles.
Lots of states in the U.S. Like I caught my redfin pickerel in Florida, and I caught my chain pickerel and grass pickerel in Tennessee, and I caught my first muskie in Ontario, Canada. That was a northern muskie, and then I caught my first spotted muskie in Lake St. Clair on the Canadian side, so that was an Ontario fish, and then I caught my first clear muskie in Kentucky. So I mean, and then I've gone to a lot of states and fished a lot of different places to try and catch all these stupid pike, and you have to be really really versatile because you got fish that are a maximum size of a pound all the way up to muskies that can get close to 70 pounds. So, I mean, there's a lot of difference between, the
1 foot to
the 6 ounce or heavier lures that you throw for muskies and the 64th or 32nd ounce lure that you fish for like grass pickerel and redfin pickerel.
Well, it's like you and I talked about before with Seth when he was doing that one pickerel for you, the wood carved one. But like you have a fish that's basically like a foot long, and then you have a fish that's over 4 foot long.
Yeah,
so
there's a huge lot of variation in size.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I was gonna just jump in on this too because you've also caught a black pike, correct?
I've caught
muskie,
a black tiger muskie, which is just a mutation.
Sure.
And then I caught a black chain pickerel in Georgia here a few years ago too. So I mean, I've caught a silver pike because actually northern pike in North America, there's actually 3 different paint jobs you can catch. One, the typical northern pike, and then they have a silver pike, which is a pike that doesn't have any markings at all. It's just like silvery blue colored. And you catch them mostly like in certain parts of Canada, and then like around the Park Lake or Park Rapids part of Minnesota's got several lakes that have silver pike. And then the other one's they call it, I guess, a leopard pike. And it's kind of looks a little bit like that southern pike, but they're not. They're even less common than the silver ones. Like they catch a few in Iowa and Wisconsin, but they're not very common anywhere.
So it kind of reminds me of, bears a little bit. And,
oh, yeah.
I've got a couple bears, and I've got the browns, the blacks, the cinnamons, but I don't have a blonde. And those are hard to get. I want a big blonde one.
Yeah.
Right?
That's where like fishermen and hunters really come together when you're a guy or gal who's really going after different species, different colors, different variations. There's a lot of crossover between hunting and fishing because like you said, David, you've got all these different black bear, colorations you want to get. Danny and I have all these fish species we want to get. And it's just so cool because there's so much variation there.
And there's some more similarity in where I see fishing and hunting as far as conservation. Obviously elk hunting, we're going to remove that elk from the population. And I think of elk or deer, an elk slam, you've got Thule, you've got Roosevelt, and you've got Rocky, right? And I've got 2 of the 3. I'm waiting on that Thule. But
Thule's up in Oregon or Washington, isn't
California.
It? Oh, California.
Yeah, California.
Roosevelt's in Washington and Oregon.
Yeah, and they are big. Like we talked about, you could get.
I always thought the Rocky Mountain was the biggest, but I guess it's not even close.
No, not. Yeah.
Is the Thule the little one? I can't remember.
Yep. Yeah, but body weight wise, a Roosevelt can get into the 1,200 pounds. A big Rocky is like 800. So
they're more moose size almost than elk size.
They're big,
beefy. They're the bodybuilders of the elk world, I guess.
But when you're out elk hunting, you want to only harvest a mature male, right? We're leaving as many females as you can out there to grow that herd. And why are you taking that mature male out and leaving those juveniles? Because they're going to add to the gene pool. The mature, it's done. It's kind of the same thing. Pike fishing, right?
Yeah.
And that's another thing. We had Pete Mena on, and we talked a little bit about pike and muskie fishing with Pete, and just talking about conservation. Fishing. This is where fishing and hunting really kind of change course a little bit, just because
you can release your fish.
You can, yeah.
And I release all my big fish. I never keep muskies or tigers.
Well, and you can tell my kids come from a fishing family because they say, "Dad, are you going to go catch an antelope? Or are you going to go catch a deer?" I'm like, "No, there's no catch and release in hunting. If I catch him with a bullet, he's done," kind of thing. But that's where it's pretty critical, especially on certain bodies of water, that you release fish. Like I think of tiger muskies especially. Tiger muskies are a sterile fish. They can't reproduce. And so like here in Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, Washington, all these places that they've been planted, if people are catching and keeping a bunch of tiger muskies,
there's nothing to replace them.
The resource
they
is
stock
gone.
More.
Yeah, exactly. And there's really, really, like from a taxpayer perspective, they're really expensive to raise. So if you have people that are harvesting them, they're gone.
Are they good to eat?
Done. I don't know.
I would imagine they taste like a pike, I would guess, but I've never kept one. I couldn't tell you.
Yeah, pike are really good. And
I'll keep smaller pike, but I don't like to kill the big pike. And then I don't keep any muskies, and I don't keep any tiger muskies, just because the main reason they stock tiger muskies out west is to reduce like rough fish species.
White suckers, carp.
Stuff like that. Yeah. So if you remove them, when they get legal, which in Wyoming is 36 inches, that's about when they start getting really good at eating the rough fish. They, get big enough where
they got a big enough mouth they can get around a couple pound sucker.
Oh, yeah. And they're very good at it.
And that's the problem with when you put tiger muskies in an area that never had them before. It's like the biggest fish they've ever caught. So, I mean, like a 30-inch tiger is a monster to them. Well, that's just a baby, to a muskie fisherman. And when they get to that legal size, and a lot of them before they get to that legal size, people thump them on the head and take them home to either get them mounted or eat them or whatever. So once they get close to legal size, most of them get taken out of the population right away, which is a bummer, because I'd way rather catch them when they're over 40 inches than they're only 30 inches or whatever. So I'm afraid Bass Lake here in about another year or two is going to get a lot of harvest going on because the fish will be getting legal. There might even be some legal ones in there now.
Yep. And before we get into this next part of the program, because I want to talk about pike a little bit more and about eating pike, because Danny, I know that's one of your favorite fish to eat. I want to talk about High Mountain Seasonings. So High Mountain Seasonings is another one of our sponsors, and they're a fantastic company, family owned, been around for 30 years. And they're based here out of Riverton, Wyoming, where Ragcast Outdoors is recorded. So definitely go check out their recipes. I'm actually in the process of thawing out a full ham that I'm going to get some video for you guys on how to make your own ham at home from a pig that we raised this last year. Another thing that they have, and David can attest to this, is if you're a hunter and you harvest deer, elk, moose, bison, anything like that, they have a ton of great stuff, don't they, David?
Oh, it's way too easy to just get a shaker and we've talked about multiple times jerky, snack sticks, salami, doing your own bacon, doing your own hams. And that it's a little more labor intensive, but I wouldn't say it's not something that the home hobbyist can't do at all. The instructions are there. It's pretty laid out. It's pretty simple. You need a scale and a kitchen cupboard, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're not at that level, you can just get the shakers and some hamburger, and on the grill season some hamburgers. They got some great products.
I use a lot of their fish smoking products, like their gourmet fish and their wild trout smoking stuff. That's how I smoke all my fish, because I smoke a lot of trout in the wintertime especially. I catch splake and tiger trout and stuff like that over at Sunshine, and then I smoke them, and I give away some of them for Christmas presents, and then I take some to my cancer doctors and nurses and stuff as a thank you, for dealing with me all the time. And their stuff is very good and very easy to use. Yeah, it's as simple, like for the fish brine, it's as simple as get a gallon of cold water, dump the packet in, and mix it together and put your fish in. I mean, it's super simple. So please go support High Mountain Seasonings. Like I said, I know all the people down there, the owners, the people that are working in the warehouse. They're really great folks. So support an American business there. We really appreciate it. But I want to get back to pike, because we do a lot of fish fries around my house, and Danny's a part of a lot of those and contributes to a lot of those. And, he'll go catch northern pike. I went and caught some. I've got some in the freezer right now. And northern pike is a delicious fish to eat. So I wanted you to talk a little bit about it.
They reproduce, right?
Yes, they reproduce, and
sometimes too well.
Yes, there's a lot of states that want to get rid of northern pike. But Danny, tell us a little bit about northern pike and how they're different from like a walleye or a crappie as far as their table fare. Well, their meat is a lot firmer, and I like it a lot better. But the worst part about northern pike is they have a lot of Y bones, which is an extra row of bones that most fish don't have that are Y-shaped, and it takes some practice to get them out of them. And I have to watch the video all the time, because I don't do it often enough, or else have Pat do it, because he seems to have it down pretty good. But if you can get you don't want to leave the skin on them, because that skin that slime on pike is really strong tasting. So take off the skin, and sometimes they got a pretty thick bar of red flesh underneath where their lateral line is. You might want to cut that out. And then if you can get the Y bones out, I think it's better than walleye, but most people like walleye better. But
so a little bit of a tangent as far as salmon goes, when we're doing the salmon species, if you're going to prepare your fish pretty quick, talk about that fish slime, you can leave the skin on salmon and cook it, and it's
that's good. How I usually do on salmon. But pike, you don't want to do that. It'll give you a nasty taste, that slime will.
Well, there's that layer of fat on a salmon, right, between the skin and the meat. And if you're going to freeze that fish for any length of time, you're going on a trip to Alaska, go ahead and skin your fillets out and go ahead and vacuum seal them without that layer of fat and without the skin on there, because then you remove the slime and the fat spoils.
The fat gets rancid on fish with high oil content. Golden trout are one of the worst ones. If you catch golden trout and try to eat one, eat it right away. Don't freeze it and try and eat it, because they go bad really fast. But if you catch one right out of the lake and eat it right there, you know, by the lake, they're one of the best fish there are in Wyoming to eat. But you don't want to freeze them.
Well, I got in on one of Patrick's fish fries, and, you know, we talked about the Y bones, but man, that's awful close to halibut.
Oh man, that's good stuff. And you know, you talked about the firmness of pike. One thing I like about it, just from a culinary perspective, like when I'm cooking it, is that northern pike holds together really well. And because it's more of a steak consistency, it's not just going to fall apart on you like a fillet of walleye will. So if you've never tried northern pike, fry some up like you would a walleye, and just try it. And I guarantee you, if you're like me and you like a little bit firmer texture of meat, you're going to love it. Because I mean, to Danny's point, if you keep that darker meat in there though,
it'll make it taste stronger.
You're not going to like it as much. So definitely try to get that out. And part of, I learned this last year, and this is from watching different YouTube videos, but bleeding the fish right when you catch them, if you're going to prepare them, and bleeding them out really well helps reduce the amount of flesh that gets tainted with that red, you know, kind of darker stuff. So definitely bleed them out really good. Get them on ice. Get the skin off. Like Danny said, they are the slimiest little boogers
ever.
Yeah, oh my gosh,
slimy and dangerous to try and hold.
Yeah, they are.
I use a fish gripper when I handle pike most of the time.
Yeah,
I've got lots of scars on my hands from pike and muskies and pickerel. Especially pickerel, because they're so small you don't really worry about them, but they have every bit as sharp a teeth as a northern or a muskie. So,
and they're very athletic too.
Yeah, they're all muscle pretty much.
So I was going to ask you about that, because I mean, you have a fisheries biology degree. What is it that makes pike, muskies, pickerel so unique? I mean, as far as their body makeup and how they operate.
Well, they're primarily ambush predators, so they're built for like short bursts of real high speed. Like they say a pike or a muskie can get up to like 35 miles an hour in like 3 body lengths or something. So, I mean, they're sprinters. They're not like a salmon or a wiper or something like that where they fight you forever and ever and ever. They fight
so it's
it's a real intense battle, but it doesn't last very long, like maybe a half a minute or a minute maybe. Or if you're using too light a line, it can last a lot longer.
It can be extremely violent when they hit.
Oh, yeah, they tend to like to come out of the water. Well, not so much northern pike, but muskies and tiger muskies and pickerel like to jump a lot. And so a lot of times you'll hook them in, and the first thing you'll see is them come flying out of the water almost like a tarpon.
So do you want to use steel leaders for those? I mean,
you have to, or your teeth, the teeth will bite your line off. Even little pickerel can bite your line off, because their walleyes have sharp teeth, but they're like a pin kind of. They're just sharp on the point.
Yeah.
And a pike's teeth are pointed, but they also have like a knife-like blade, so they can cut you on the side or on the end. So if you get bit by a pike, a lot of times you don't feel it at first, but they'll slice into you real bad, and then it takes forever for it to quit bleeding. I don't know if there's something in their saliva or what, but I mean, it'll bleed a long time, and you won't even know you're cut at first.
Yeah.
Then you'll look down and your hand just bleeding like a stuck pig.
One way to think about it is think about a traffic cone. That's like a walleye tooth. And then think about a sword.
That's more like
that's
a pike.
like a pike tooth. I mean, they're just built very differently. And I mean, I would much rather get raked by a big walleye than by a pike.
Oh yeah,
any day.
It'll just scratch you. A walleye will. A pike will just gouge you really deep.
So fish grippers when going after these species.
So you got to use the grip, but then support their body too with your other hand when you use a gripper.
Yeah. Something I did not know. It's great advice.
And they do a gator roll. So like when you get them up close, once
do they do that to their prey?
No, it's more just trying to get away from you mechanism, because when you start to get them close to the bank, they get there and they go crazy. They go nuts, and they'll roll, and they'll wrap your line up because they're just so powerful. They're just like a tube of muscle.
Yeah, kind of like a freshwater barracuda or something, I guess would be a good way to. I've actually had a muskie break my rod because when he started spinning, he got the line so tight that he snapped the end of my rod off.
Jeez.
So what other species have you fished for that are kind of on this list and similar? I mean, you just mentioned saltwater. Any other species that come to mind?
Oh, I've caught almost every species in Wyoming except for the shovel-nosed sturgeon, and then I haven't caught a drum in Wyoming. I've caught drum, but I never caught them in Wyoming. I've caught, I don't know, a bunch of species. Caught striped bass, white bass, yellow bass, wipers.
You've caught pretty much all the bass species, haven't you?
Well, they keep adding more sunfish bass species. Yeah, the splitters. Now there's like 8 different kinds of bass in like Georgia or something, when there used to only be Florida strain and northern strain, and then some smallmouth and some
Warmouths.
The shoal bass.
Shoal bass, yeah.
But now they got, I don't know, it depends on what drainage. There's like Swanee bass, and I don't know. Like I said, there's 8 or 9 different what they call species now, bass. So IGFA came out with these Royal Slam clubs back in the 80s, and they had a bass slam, a trout slam, a salmon slam for the freshwater people, and then they had a bunch of them for different ocean ones. Well, I had the first trout slam and the first bass slam in the U.S., but they kind of threw them together kind of haphazardly, because the bass slam included largemouth, smallmouth, spots, shoal bass, but it also had like stripers and white bass and wipers and yellow bass and stuff, and they're not even in the same family. That's 2 different families. And then like on the trout, they had like char and trout and Pacific salmon.
That's like saying a king salmon and a kokanee are similar or need to be in the same.
Well, they are in the same family. They're both Pacific salmon. Yeah. But I mean, they included rainbows, cutthroats, and goldens, which are actually now oncorhynchus, and brown trout and Atlantic salmon are salmo, and char are salvelinus. And so they had like all 3 of those together, but they didn't have like the salmon slam is completely separate, and it's a king and a silver and a chum and a sockeye and a pink, and then they throw in an Atlantic salmon too, even though it's in a different family.
Well, I don't have the salmon slam.
Neither do I.
I don't have the Atlantic.
I only have kings and sockeyes, and then if you count kokanee, it's something different, even though it's just a landlocked sockeye. Yeah.
Well,
that's the only 3 I have.
A leg up on you. I did live in Alaska, and they're all there. So
yeah, well, I went to Alaska one time back in '87. Those king salmon are brutal. I'll give them credit. They're the most brutal fish I've ever caught.
They are a strong fish.
There's video on, we've got it up on one of the older podcasts. My best king salmon was in the net and out of the net, and I cried in the bottom of the boat for a little while.
It was a huge one. Kind of like that one that you have mounted, that,
Yeah, I've caught 2. I hooked 3 when I was up there, and I caught 2, a 40-pounder and a 35, which for the Kenai, that's nothing spectacular, but for most of the salmon streams in Alaska, that's pretty good fish.
It's a good fish.
For listeners, I think the Les Anderson's king there is 98 pounds.
Yeah. It sits in the Ford dealer there in Soldotna.
Yeah.
Extremely
Les
rare.
Anderson was actually from Thermopolis.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Is he kin to some of the other Andersons there then?
I don't know. My ex-roommate, Ron Gorseth's dad or grandfather lived in Thermopolis. His name was Harry Lindy, and he knew Les real well. And about the time that Les caught that, he was talking about how he, was like his neighbor or something in Thermopolis.
Well, he caught that on the bank, rod and reel, and it was like an hour and a half fight to land that fish.
Yeah, it was a monster. I've seen pictures of it, but I never have actually seen the mount. I was in Soldotna, but we didn't stop in the Ford dealer to see it. It may not be there anymore. But I'd say of all the fish I caught, that king salmon's the most brutal. But if a sockeye got that big, I think a sockeye would be stronger than a king, because them sockeyes are just... they just greyhound across the water.
Pound for pound, the sockeye has the most power.
I got spooled by the first 2 I caught, because I started out with a trout rod and 8-pound test. And when they get in that main current in the Kenai,
I want to know how an 8 to 12-pound fish can break 20-pound test.
That's somebody that doesn't know how to use their drag. Probably. Well, I got up to 10 before I started landing them. Up to 12, I guess, before I started landing.
I broke a couple of fish off for 2 reasons. I think one was it was about to get into everybody else, and the second reason was when you're flipping in the river, you tend to nick your line on the rocks and stuff. I mean, those are the times when you break.
But they make such long runs, you can't. Man. I mean, they'll run like. It's like 300 yards,
it's like hooking a freight train, man.
Yeah.
My favorite is silvers, though. You always get them out of the water once, and sometimes twice.
That's what I hear. I've seen kings come out of the water, and sockeyes come out of the water a bunch of times, but they don't really come straight up. They just kind of like a dolphin or something, shooting along the surface.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Danny, you've done a lot of different things. Like, I know you don't go around tooting your own horn, but you've held some records too. I mean, you had line class world records.
I was in a record chasing phase there for a while back in the 80s, where I had like 45 or so line class world records, either in the Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame or the IGFA, but I kind of gave that up here, 10, 12 years ago, but had a lot of records for golden trout, which used to be one of my specialties a long time ago.
That's a whole nother podcast we're going to do on goldens.
What would be your advice for somebody that wanted to chase a record of any kind? Or a
slam or something like that.
If you're going for records, you need to get either a Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame record book or an IGFA record book, which you can get by contacting them and send them a certain amount of money, or if you join, you get a free record book. And then you look it over and you see what species, are available to you nearby, and then you see what the records are for the different line classes. Like I said, I had a lot of golden trout records, and then I had a fair amount of mountain whitefish records too, because they keep records on pretty much every kind of fish. So if you look for fish that aren't real popular, like mountain whitefish, most people just consider them a nuisance. Mm-hmm. And some of the lower line classes, like 2 and 4 pound test, it only takes pretty small fish, like a pound, or I don't know what the records are anymore. And so you load all your reels with, line in those classes that you think you can catch fish big enough to break, and you just keep fishing until you get them.
Yeah, and I remember when you caught some of those bigger fish, because when I was a little kid, I always looked forward to coming to Riverton to see my grandparents, but also to come see Danny, because he was always catching really cool fish. And I remember one time going over there, and you had this massive golden trout that you had caught.
Yeah.
Getting to see that as a little kid.
How big a golden trout are we talking?
My biggest one's 21 1/4 length.
Yeah, it's like,
I've caught one that was 311, my heaviest, but I had one on. I lost one time that was a little over 4, I think. And the absolute biggest one I've ever seen was probably not quite 5 pounds, but I didn't catch him because I used to fish them real hard in the summer above Lander for a few years there, and I got where I could catch them fairly good, and I could tell, their size pretty good because I'd caught enough of them. But
that is one fish that is on my list to catch, is go get a golden.
Fish. I want to get a big golden.
Yeah, a male golden in his spawning colors is one of the prettier fish. It's about like a male brookie as far as how pretty they are.
Yeah.
And they're really annoying to catch because you'll see them a lot of the time, and they'll come charging up to your fly or your lure like they're going to hit it, and then they'll stop right in front of it, and they'll open and close their mouth while they're looking at it. And then they'll just turn around and swim off.
So they go through the motions, they just don't.
A lot of times. Now, if you get 2 or 3 of them, they get competitive, then one of them will charge in and grab it to keep his buddies from getting it. But if you get one, they're awful hard to catch a lot of the time. That was why I started fishing them, was because they were pretty challenging to catch, like muskies. When I couldn't go muskie fishing, I'd go chase golden, but you got to be in pretty good shape because almost all the golden trout lakes, are 10,000 feet or higher.
Now, they're from California, right?
Yeah, originally.
And they were all stocked by horseback up in the winds?
Originally.
Now
they stock them with helicopters and airplanes, but back in the old days, they took milk cans full of them on mules or something and brought them in. But now, they use planes. And
so are they doing pretty good in the lakes as far?
I think they're starting to come back. They had a real bad freeze above land, or where the snow got deep enough that a lot of them lakes winter killed back in 98, 99. That winter, I was working in Lander, and we had a 48-inch snow one week, and then about a week and a half later, we had a 52-inch snow over there. And, of course, it was a lot deeper in the mountains. And I went in that next spring early summer, as soon as I could get in there, and I didn't see a golden trout one in my normal lakes. And in the spring times when you see them, usually, they're up running the shoreline looking for places to spawn and stuff. So when you didn't see any, that wasn't a good sign. But then for a long time, they didn't have any to stock, because they used to have a broodstock lake over by Pinedale called Surprise Lake, and they had a forest fire over there. And because of that forest fire, the lake water got too warm and the golden started dying out, and so they lost their broodstock. So then they had to make a deal with California to get some more golden trout. And for a long time there, California had a moratorium where they wouldn't let any goldens leave the state, because I think they were mad because the ones they sent to Wyoming, end up getting a lot bigger than they get in California. And,
they did.
Oh yeah, all the biggest goldens are from Wyoming. I mean, the world record's like
I've got a new deal for them. We'll trade some grizzly bears for some more golden trout.
Yeah, deal. We'll give them some wolves for a bonus. Just throw those in there.
I don't think they'd be too keen on it, but that sounds like a good idea to me.
Well, maybe they should take the grizzly bear off their state flag if they don't have any grizzly bears.
But anyway, I really got into the golden trout thing, and then a few years ago, Wyoming started this ultimate angler deal, and I fished so many times and, fished all over the state. And so I know, where to catch big whatever certain times a year. And so I had an advantage over a lot of people when it started, because I knew, where to go to catch a lot of these. And then also we're really lucky here in Fremont County because we have some of the most diverse fisheries in the whole state, because we got the excellent bass fishing, excellent walleye fishing, trout, excellent trout fishing, and burbot and all sorts of stuff. Whereas a lot of the state, is just like trout only or warm water species only. We have a lot more variety. Like in Boysen, you can get you can get burbot, sauger, walleye, perch, crappie, rainbows, browns, like 7 species just out of Boysen if you're good at it, or lucky or whatever. Then you go up like in the Wind Mountains and you can get your golden and your grayling and then white some of them lakes have whitefish, and then some of them lakes up there have splake. Splake's pretty hard to get like above Lander. The best place to get big splake is over like at Sunshine over by Matitsi.
Yep, Brooks.
Yeah, Brooks has them, but it takes a 20-inch splake. That's pretty unusual for 20-inch splake out of Brooks.
And for our listeners, Danny was the first one in Wyoming, even in spite of his cancer, to do the Ultimate Angler. So to get the Ultimate Angler, you have to catch 10 different species of master angler-sized fish. So I'm at 8 right now, and it's challenging. I mean, you got to put in a lot of time, and you have to know what you're doing.
And you have to fish for fish that you maybe don't fish very much or never fish. Like I still haven't figured out how to get my sturgeon yet.
We're going to figure that one out.
Yeah, and then, but I said sauger because Fremont County is one of the best places to catch a master angler sauger.
And to get a master angler sauger, it has to be 23 inches.
That's pretty difficult.
Big sauger, just so you know, guys. That's a big sauger.
Some of them are pretty easy, like the rainbow trout's probably the easiest one to get. 20 inches. I mean, you can get them out of Boysen or below the dam pretty regular. You can
catch 10 to 12 out of Boysen in one day if you put
it right
into it.
Yeah, and then like largemouth bass is pretty easy in Fremont County because Camilla weight's got it's 16 inches on largemouth. There's a lot of 16-inch and bigger bass in Camilla weight. There's bass that big like in the ponds down there at Rendezvous Site and places like that too.
Can't get the smallmouth here.
No, we don't have smallmouth in our county.
That's the bummer.
And we don't have northern pike in our county. Well, not officially.
Yeah.
We had northern pike for a little while because they stocked some accidentally in Ocean Lake probably 10 years ago. Yeah. But I think they're all gone now.
Yeah, Danny and I talk about this a lot, is that if you want to get kids and people interested in fishing, the Master Angler program is a really good way to do that because it gives you a challenge and it gives you something to shoot for.
Yeah, and you're allowed to keep or release the fish. You just have to have a good picture of it. So if people are wanting to eat walleye or whatever and they catch a 23-inch walleye, because I think walleye's only 23.
Yeah, 23, yep.
That's fairly doable in Ocean Lake or Boysen or even the Wind River sometimes. Yep. And I know most people that kills them to turn a walleye loose. Well, after you catch him, you don't have to turn him loose if you don't want to. I turn most of mine back because I don't like to keep big fish of any species very well because you're messing up the gene pool somewhat.
So for Master Angler, you just need a photo with a length. Right?
Yeah.
And then you can release that fish.
Yeah, if you want to, or you can keep it. It doesn't matter. You just have to have a good picture with it, with some kind of a measuring device. And I think they like it better than if you have a picture of you holding it too, but it's not required. You just have to have a picture. And I think there's only like 6 to 10 ultimate anglers so far in Wyoming that have completed, the 10. I'm working on my second 10, and I've been trying to catch different species than I turned in for my first 10, and I'm like too short now.
There's 24 total. So, I mean, a guy, depending on where you live in Wyoming, you have a lot of different opportunities at it because it's 24 species. So lots of variety.
Yeah, like Keyhole if you went up to Keyhole, you could get quite a few of them. They have drum in there. They have smallmouth, crappies, northern pike, perch, walleyes. I mean, there's 6 right there.
Well, they have the North American Grand Slam as well, similar in the hunting realm, right? And it's 29 of the big game species. And
well, this is just a state thing.
Oh yeah,
they don't really have a national thing, but I'm sure they probably will someday. And it's something to just give you a little more motivation to go try fishing other places, I guess.
And other species too.
Yeah, like guys that specialize in walleyes, if they decide they want to try and get a ultimate angler, you know, it forced them to fish for something besides walleye and
like
sauger.
a tiger muskie or a pike or something like that. Yeah.
And some of the species are really hard to get. Like, I don't think anybody's turned in a shovel-nosed sturgeon yet, and there's only been 2 or 3 sauger, I think, and then, which I have one of them. And there's only been, I think, 1 tiger muskie that I know of, and it's happened to be me.
Yeah.
But I fish for them a lot, so I kind of know what I'm doing. But Wyoming's tiger muskie population is really low because for about 6 or 8 years, we couldn't get tiger muskies to sock. So they're just starting to get the program going good again. And I think you could probably get a master angler out of Bass Lake or Badwater Pond probably either this year or next year. But most of the best tiger muskie fishing where you have a chance of getting, you know, like a 40-inch or bigger be Healy or LAK, and they're more up on the northeastern part of the state.
So, you know, as far as just tips, tackle, when you're going out for a specific species, are you going to take a whole bunch of lures, or are you going to take just a few lures and one rod and reel combo? And I mean, what's your plan of attack, and what's the reason for why?
Well, if I'm fishing for just around here, I generally just use my medium light spinning rod with 6-pound test on it. And then if I'm after walleyes or trout, you can use similar lures. Like I like suspending crankbaits mostly for them. But if I'm going bass fishing, I go heavier line because bass like to bury into the reeds and stuff as soon as you hook them, so you have to have heavier line to pull them out. So I'll go up to like 10 or 12-pound mono, or I like to use about 20-pound braid mostly.
Now, is there a difference in grade of mono between brands, or is pretty much any brand mono similar to another brand?
Well, any of the big name brands are decent. My favorite is Strand, but a lot of people like Berkeley. But when I used to fish for records, Berkeley line didn't always break where it was supposed to, so I used Strand most of the time because it seemed to break more consistent. But like Strand and Berkeley and Maxima, there's like 4 or 5 brands that they're all decent quality. I wouldn't buy the little 300 or 600 yard spools for $1.69 Shakespeare line. That stuff's not usually too dependable.
Well, there's 2 reasons for that. One, you talked about the breaking points is, you know, break weights.
Inconsistent.
But also, yeah, I've noticed with that really cheap line, it messes up on the spool if you're using a spinning rod a lot more.
Yeah, it tends to tangle a lot faster.
Really bad, yeah.
Whereas the better quality lines don't do that as bad.
Yeah, see, Danny, he's a Strand guy. I'm a Berkeley guy. I think Berkeley's gotten pretty good over the last few years, but I mean, they both work really well. I've used both of them, and they're high quality. I mean, they'll do the job.
So when you're going for these trophy fish, is there a specific knot that's your go-to knot, or I mean, does any fishing knot work?
Well, when I'm using smaller stuff like I do around here, I usually just use a improved clinch to attach my lures to my line. But if I'm going after muskies or pike or something like that, I usually use like a Palomar knot to hold my leader to my line. Because a lot of times you're using braided line when you're fishing for them, and improved clinch will slip because the braid's so slick, but a Palomar will hold. So that's the 2 knots I use. I don't like knot 2 different lines together with nail knots or all that very often.
Uni knots and stuff.
Yeah, I usually have to look at the direction to even tie them because I don't tie them enough to. But I can tie a Palomar knot or improved clinch in my sleep because I do it so many times.
So pretty much, you know, worldwide, you can kind of take a few lures and you can go hunt some water down and catch a fish, right?
Well, if I have a little bit of idea what I'm fishing for, yeah.
So when you're in a foreign country, is the technique and style a whole lot different, or are there some pretty big similarities?
I thought there was a lot more similarities and differences, but they do have regional lures they like better over. Like in Russia, like I said, they couldn't figure out why I wanted to fish for pike in the first place because they don't really consider them that important. They're big on taimen and linox and a lot of those big minnow species and stuff. Pike are too much work, I guess, because they Y bones and stuff. So, but they're big on like spoons and spinners, which is what a lot of northern pike fishermen use all the time here. I just am a top water addict because they're so much more fun to catch fish on top. And I thought those pike would probably hit top waters pretty good, and they do. There's like fishing river muskies, but with a little bit smaller top water.
And I got addicted to, dry fly fishing. I fly fish, I spinner fish, I bait fish, whatever, right? I archery hunt and I rifle hunt. But there's something about when you lay if there's a hatch going on that the trout are feeding on and you lay that fly out there and a fish erupts out of the water, you know that he's coming.
Or in Danny's case, and he got me hooked on this, when you throw a rumbler or a whopper plopper and you see this huge
wake
coming up behind it. Or else the lure just shoots straight up in the air because the fish comes straight up underneath it or something. It's exciting.
Awesome. Or seeing that shadow, even when you can see the fish kind of come up off the bottom and start to follow your lure, it's like, oh crap, here it comes. It's about to happen. It's about to get real.
Yeah, it's real hard if you haven't fished topwater too much to set the hook way too soon, because you hear that splash and you want to just set the hook instantly. Well, you got to actually wait until you feel the weight of the fish before you set the hook, because a lot of times they don't really have it in their mouth when that first explosion happens.
Wide open, and you pull it like I did over at LAK, and you pull it right out of their mouth. That's brutal. Well, it'll make you cry.
Patrick and I went to a lake and we were brook trout fishing, and I got to catch a fluke. I had to go to wet flies instead of dry flies, but I got to sight cast because they were where we were fishing. You could see them, and it was pretty cool to. There was a couple times I pulled the lure out of their mouth.
And Danny caught one a couple of years ago. Wasn't it a couple of years ago? You caught like a 24-inch brookie, which is a giant brook trout. And
caught it on an X-Wrap.
And the thing about Danny is, I've gotten to fish with Danny a lot. He's very good at finding different species, like probably one of the better unsung, multi-species anglers out there. He's been able to catch a lot of different things. He's had lots of different records, and it's just always fun to fish with him because I always learn something new. And one of the things that I think I've learned about Danny that is kind of unique, but it's a good thing to remember, is when you have confidence in a lure and you have confidence in how you work the lure and you're good at it, that's usually a good thing to stick with. Like you don't have to be fancy. You just have to be good at your craft, whatever that is.
Yeah, I don't change lures a lot during a trip. Sometimes muskie fishing, if I can't get anything to go, I'll change. But usually when I go muskie fishing, I'm in my wader, so I only can carry like 4 or 5 lures with me at a time. Whereas you watch the TV shows, the guys in the boats, they got like 100 lures hanging in the side of their boat, or these great big huge tackle boxes full of lures. And I found that if you get 4 or 5 different kinds of lures that you have confidence in, that usually works just as good. But that's just my opinion.
Well, and not that I'm comparing too much similarity, but growing up doing steelhead out of a drift boat, we did a lot of plugging, and there was a couple plugs in that boat that were just tuned right and just had the right rattle in them that they would outperform other lures. You'd buy hot shot plugs, right? You buy them at the store, K15s or whatever you're using, and you'd get a certain silver one, and we had fished it so much that the silver had completely gone and it's almost opaque now. Yeah. But it was tuned and it rattled just right that you could put another lure, the same package, open it up on the rod next to it, and 9 out of 10 times it was that other lure that was going to smack a fish.
That's like a lot of musky lures, that the wooden ones especially. Like you might get 1 out of 5 that actually runs the way it needs to where it really catches fish. And maybe 1 or 2 of the other ones you might be able to get tuned to where they work good. But you'll usually have a couple dogs that you just can't catch anything on. And when you're spending $20 to $50 on a lure, that's kind of painful.
Yeah, musky lures.
I know when I used to fish in Minnesota a lot, the guides would go into the muskie shops and they'd buy a bunch of lures and test out. And they'd keep the ones that work good, and the other ones they'd return, And I don't know if the shops knew what was going on or not, but they made sure they got the ones that worked right, like Suics and stuff like that. Suic's a wooden jerk bait, and it's got a dive and rise action. It's one of the most popular musky lures there is, and only 2 out of 10 would work right or whatever, and maybe a couple others you could get tuned to work right.
Well, I know when you're first starting out with any new lure, any new fish species, take just dry fly fishing, for example, once you find that fly that those fish will accept, it's really easy to go back to the store and, okay, I need 10 more of this mosquito pattern in this size. But when you're first out there, first hitting that water, it's tough to figure out what is this fish actually going to accept as its food, and am I wasting my, woolly bugger is a good all around. Anywhere you go, if you throw a woolly bugger out,
you'll catch something eventually.
You could eventually catch something. But the same day, the same spot, if you go from that woolly bugger to a mosquito pattern or a midge or a gnat or a bead-headed nymph or whatever it might be, you might catch 10x fish.
Yeah.
It sounds like with pike, it's more just hitting the water and getting the presentation right in the right spot.
Yeah, well, that's how it is with most fish. Like whenever Rapala comes out with a new suspending jerk, I buy one to try it. And some of them I bought I really liked, and some of them I didn't like that well. And then after you find one you like, you still have to work with it to figure out what the right twitching and stuff is to do to make it work.
The right cadence.
And then I tend to like modify mine because a lot of them either sink too fast or raise too fast. And so I mess with the weighting on them and stuff. So a lot of mine don't look even stock because I've messed around with them a lot, but they do exactly what I want them to do. And then it just kills me when I lose one because I spent all this time getting it just right. And then I get fouled, hooked or on a rock or break off a big carp or something accidentally on it. It just kills me.
Yeah, it's no fun losing that favorite lure. I've had a few of those, and Danny's seen me about lose my mind when I lose
A lot of times I'll try and go wading after them. Like the other night, I ran out of a certain kind of a Rapala that I really like, and I had some deep diving ones, but they dived too deep for where I was fishing. So I cut the bills back on one, and then I waded it to where it rose really slow, and I got it where it was working really good. And I'd caught several fish on it, including, that's what I caught. No, I didn't catch that huge brown on it, I guess, but I'd caught some fish on it, and so I really was liking it. Well, I got hung up below the dam at Boyson. I don't know, it's probably been a week and a half ago at night. It was like 8 o'clock at night, pitch dark out. And here I am putting my waders on, wading out in the river, trying to get that stupid lure loose. And it was cold. The wind was blowing.
And those rocks down there on either side of
that. Heck, I got so much algae on them. I managed to get in and out without falling, but I came pretty close. I had my net I was using kind of like as a tripod to help hold me up. And then I'm sitting here, trying to get that thing loose, holding a flashlight in my mouth and stuff. I finally got it loose, but most people would just broke it off and said, well, we'll have to get another one. But yeah. I'd spent so much time trying to get that thing just right, I really didn't want to lose it.
Now, there's been a couple times we've had that favorite plug steelhead fishing hang up, and I've rode quite a ways back upstream to get that lure back. You dang near break your rod because your rod folds under the drift boat and you're being pushed downstream. So
yeah, when I was in high school, I didn't have a whole lot of money, and I really liked Panther Martin spinners. Well, they were like $2-something a piece, and back then that was pretty expensive. So if I got hung up with the Panther Martin, I'd go wading out to get it. Well, one time I was fishing by the Waipo Bridge because there's pretty good brown trout fishing there, and there was this little island and had a tree in it. And of course, I managed to get my lure hung up in that tree somehow. And so I waded out to the island. I started to climb that tree, and I got up there, went to reach out to grab that branch that had the Panther Martin on it. It snapped, and I fell into the water. My friend was over on the bank just laughing his butt off. He goes, well, was it worth it? And I said, yeah, I got my lure back. But it was like a $2.29 Panther Martin or whatever. But
hey, but you got it back.
Yeah, but I sure got wet. And if somebody would have had a video camera, this was back before video cameras were really even around, they could have probably made some money on that America's Funniest Home Video, watching some kid do all that stupid stuff just to get a $2.29 Panther Martin back or something.
That's worth it, though. It's totally worth it. Well, it's been awesome having you on to talk about this. I think we're going to have you back on to talk about Goldens, especially because I know there's a lot of guys out there that are big golden trout chasers, and so it'd be kind of fun for them to hear a little bit about some of your insights since you've been there and done that. But again, I just want to say thanks for coming on, and thanks for all you've taught me about fishing, because you've
I don't know if I've taught you anything or not.
Oh, you've taught me a bunch. So
Danny, it really was a pleasure to be on this side, and I'm glad you came on.
Yeah, it was fun to hear about Russia and France and Italy and all these other places.
Getting back to that real quick, Italian people are some of the friendliest people in the world, and French people are some of the most unfriendly people in the world. I met some nice people in the small towns in France, but like in the cities, they don't like Americans, and they don't like anybody, I don't think. And
how about Russia?
Russia, the people are real cold at first, but you're not even supposed to smile at people you don't know out there. That's offensive to them. They think you're trying to pull something on them or whatever. But after they get to know you, they're some of the nicest people I met. I mean, I made several friends over there, but it's definitely a police state over there too. It was kind of scary.
And I gotta say, I've never seen Russians eat so much fish in my life. He had his guide brought his bride to Wyoming after Danny had gone out there.
Yeah.
They came over here and I did a big fish
Walleye fry for him.
I think that guy's wife had 3 or 4 plates
full. Oh yeah, she loved that.
She loved that.
I don't know if she hadn't ate the whole time she was out here, or if she just really liked fish. But man, he told me later on that that was the high point of her trip over here was having that walleye. With
Patrick's walleye is pretty dang good.
He takes it serious.
We had so much fun with him, but it was really cool to meet him. And so yeah, thanks for sharing the story, Danny. It's been awesome. So again, guys, if you want to hear more Radcast Outdoors, go to radcastoutdoors.com and definitely go give us a rating on your favorite podcast streaming service. Thanks again, everybody.
See ya.
Thanks again for listening to the Radcast Outdoors podcast. We hope that you've enjoyed the show. If so, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this podcast and subscribe, share, and give us a 5-star rating, which really helps other people find the show. You can find all of our shows, recipes, giveaways, videos, and much more at radcastoutdoors.com. While you're there, please help support the show by purchasing a Radcast Outdoors shirt or hat. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We also have a Radcast community on Facebook called Radcast Nation, and we'd love for you to join in the conversation there. And of course, please help support our sponsors who make this show possible. Thank you again to PK Lures, Bow Spider, and High Mountain Seasonings. Until next time, get out there and enjoy the outdoors.